When he first heard of the Cold War-era space race, Paul Haney was an established journalist and assistant city editor on the prestigious Washington Star in the nation's capital. That was when President Dwight Eisenhower announced in 1957 that the United States would be participating in the upcoming International Geophysical Year.
During this period, which will actually be 18 months long, the scientists of the United States will join their efforts with those of the scientists of some 60 other nations to make the most intensive study ever undertaken of our planet.
In an oral history at the New Mexico Museum of Space History in Alamogordo, Haney said, "I had to write a 2-line headline for a late edition, and I remember that I wrote, 'The U.S. to orbit moonlet around the Earth.' Some of the old-timers said, 'Gee, that Haney, he can really understand science.' And that's what happens at newspapers. Suddenly, I was the bright shining star of science at the Star." Before long, that he really understood science would be an understatement. 3 months later, Haney, a Navy veteran who served during the Korean War and who was subsequently graduated from Kent State University, reported on the Soviet Union's Sputnik launch. He said, "People's jaws dropped and their eyes glossed over, and I'm not overstating it. The fastest you could go in an airplane in 1957 was around Mach 2 or 3, maybe 1,200 to 1,800 miles per hour. All of a sudden, even to play the game in space, you had to go 18,000 miles per hour to be in orbit." A year after that, the Congress created NASA, which advertised public information jobs, and they hired Haney. When he left the Star, his editor said he'd keep Haney's seat warm and the job open, but Haney never looked back. "It was one of the few times in my life when I guessed right," Haney recalled in his foreword to the book, Into That Silent Sea. NASA's first public affairs offices were in the Dolly Madison House in Washington, D.C. Madison was the wife of President James Madison. Haney is credited with creating real-time reporting for NASA missions for not just news reporters, but the public as well, beginning with the first Mercury space flights. Haney himself was commentator on the Gemini 3 mission in March 1963, the first crewed Gemini, and the United States' first 2-person crew mission, John Young and Gus Grissom. But selling such a profoundly new way of broadcasting wasn't an easy one. In his oral history, Haney explained the moment he was given the go-ahead by President John F. Kennedy's press secretary, Pierre Salinger.
They can remember this long-winded conversation on May 2nd or May 3rd, and at the end of it, Salinger said, "Okay, he buys it. Do it." I just threw the phone up in the air. I don't know when I was ever so exhilarated by a decision. That changed the whole format. It was the first time we had an information officer on the line calling out the progress of the flight. It was radical. And before that, all you did was this little statement. And then maybe you had a few words with people leaving the site. It opened the program up. It made it responsible and made us responsible for reporting not just the good things, but the bad things as well. Kennedy understood it, and the program changed dramatically.
It wasn't Haney's only tough sell. NASA grew out of NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which had studied and advanced flight since 1915. Haney told how the old-timers just didn't see mankind's next logical step into space.
I remember the fellow named Henry Reed visiting with him 6 months after I went to work for him. I went down to Langley, and it was like a trip to Rome. I was ushered into the presence of this great fellow who was the director of the Langley Research Center, which was it. And he sat down and he closed the door, and Harry Colcom, who became managing editor of Av Week, was with me. We'd just gone to work for NASA as information. And Reed sat us down and he said, "Now look, this man in the can stuff, that's just idiotic." He said, "No, we somehow have to I'm doing everything I can to get this Mercury program." And the Mercury program, that was his home, it was right there at Langley. But he told me that he was doing everything in his power to get this thing neutralized and getting it pushed out so it could be, it wouldn't be a serious effort. And I came out of there beating my head. He gave me about 45 minutes on the wonders of flight. finally he and the others had accepted the airplane, and they thought that was the greatest thing going. But this space stuff, forget it.
In 1961, NASA moved Haney to the Manned Spacecraft Center, today the Johnson Center in Houston. There, he was Chief of Public Affairs, and he worked in mission control for Project Gemini and the early Apollo flights. This earned him the nickname of the Voice of Mission Control. One publication called his distinctive voice a mellifluous southern drawl. In April 1964, Haney, at left, introduced the first Gemini astronauts. Seated are Wally Schirra, Tom Stafford, MSC Director Dr. Robert Gilruth, Gus Grissom, John Young, and the Flight Crew Operations Assistant Director Deke Slayton. So distinctive was Haney's voice that he recorded narration for the Capitol Records release of Apollo 11, We Have Landed on the Moon.
The Eagle is home, at rest on the hostile environment for which it was created, and quickly named Tranquility Base. But now we learn that the landing was not automatic, that on final approach the commander, Neil Armstrong, was in control.
Houston, that may have seemed like a very long final phase. The auto-targeting was taking us right into a football field-sized crater with a large number of big boulders and rocks, and it required flying manually over the rock field to find a reasonably good area.
After landing, just 49 seconds of fuel remained.
When NASA confirmed the astronauts were safely touched down, Haney remarked on air, "Not bad for government work." While at NASA in Houston, Haney helped establish the first museum there. The effort was, he said in his oral history, one of my little struggles that paid off. I found myself swimming against the mainstream. It seemed to me that the people of Houston were so responsive and just the best fans we had. They would just turn out and support you. Never content just to sit behind a desk, the reporter's drive in him often saw Haney in the field. This image shows Haney in the Panama Canal Zone on June 22, 1964. NASA's third group of astronauts was undergoing tropical survival school. Here you see from left Chief Antonio Zarco of the Choco tribe, which made their home in the area, Haney, and Al Webb of United Press International. During Apollo 7, Haney was invited to join the Ancient and Honorable Order of Turtles. With roots in World War II, the invitee must answer a question, the response which would be innocuous but, most likely, include a questionable double entendre. The Apollo crew asked Haney the question from space on live television. At that moment, Haney was sitting in a packed mission control. The conundrum was if he failed to answer, he had to buy a round of drinks. Haney remained mum. It's assumed he later bought the round. Haney actually left NASA early in 1969, not long before Apollo 10. He landed in London, England, and began broadcasting with Apollo 10 for the independent television news. For Apollo 11, the first manned mission to land on the moon, his exemplary coverage won high ratings. This historic event just happened to be on Haney's 41st birthday. One British publication wrote, Haney supplied a close knowledge of the critical moments of the flight and a familiarity with the main personalities both in space and on the ground, all brought to life with his southern cadences and droll humor. Haney also wrote for the magazine The Economist, and his agent booked him on speaking tours throughout Europe. Having been an integral part of the space race from its beginning, Haney often had inside and sometimes funny stories to relate, such as this one he told about astronauts Don Isley and Wally Schirra and NASA Administrator James Webb.
Don had two N's, and Isley was the name. It was always mispronounced. It was spelled E-I-S-E-L-E, but it came off Eisel and Ezel. And Webb, Jim Webb, every time he introduced Don, he would pronounce it a different way. I don't know, maybe that runs something in the water in Tally Ho, North Carolina, where Webb was from. But it prompted Schirra one day to say, well, thank you, Mr. Weeb. For Webb, the weeb, weave, I remember what he used to say. Isley came right in on top of Schirra and said, yeah, I'd like to talk to the joker who thought up this such and such experiment. I mean, it was that kind of, over the period of several, 3, 4 flight histories. You've never had anything quite like that, where the crew was taking the hide off. They finally called Dick Slayton in, and he was supposed to tell them to be nice and talk nice, and he wouldn't do it. Between them, they had a nice, polite discussion.
Haney's interest took him many places over many years. In 1971, company officials at the Astrodome sent him to every capital in Europe to discuss erecting family fun complexes. In 1972, he became Director of Public Relations for the National Association of Broadcasters. He was editor for the Houston Chronicle. When his wife, Jan, joined the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Charleston, South Carolina, Haney joined the Charleston Post. When Jan was promoted to St. Petersburg, Florida, Haney went to work writing for the St. Petersburg Times. From 1983 to 1989, the Haneys published a weekly paper in Horizon City, Texas, near El Paso. Paul Haney passed away in May 2009 at age 80. Among the luminaries he'd known was the Kennedy family and the Soviet cosmonauts. The Queen visited him on the ITN set. In 1993, he was inducted into the International Space Hall of Fame. The man who broadcast momentous moments to millions and who traveled around the world and spoke to untold numbers chose, as his final venture, buying a 5-acre cherry orchard in 1989 in High Rolls, New Mexico, in the Sacramento Mountains. For visitors, he'd trot out the orchard's pet llama. He joined the Lions Club and reported for the Alamogordo Daily News. But there was one incident in his life on which Haney did not report, instead becoming the story. In November 1965, he was aboard a National Airlines flight when a hijacker acted. Traveling with Haney were most of the Project Gemini management members, 11 in all. They included Max Faget, who designed the Mercury spacecraft, and NASA Flight Director Chris Kraft. The hijacker pointed a gun at Kraft, then headed for the flight deck, pulling a second firearm and firing wildly. In the cockpit, the pilot executed a sudden descending turn. The hijacker stumbled and fell. Kraft tackled the gunman, and Haney, he piled on top.